Okay, so I just want to give you a very basic idea about polygonal modelling before we come back to doing some things for your tile project. So at its simplest, you can start any primitive, and usually it's best to start with something like a box. So I'm just going to click there on the box tool, click and drag to make my base, move the cursor up to set a height, and then click again. Now, you can see there my units, I have to go to the Modify tab to see them there. Length, width and height. Just remember, let's do that again, when you first create them, you'll see them in the Create tab, but don't get used to always finding them there because it will go from there, but you can always go to the Modify tab. So hopefully getting used to some things like that. I'll delete the second one and then select the first one again, and you can see again those parameters there. So they're in inches, and you'll need to work in inches when you're working through those exercises, but for now I'm going to go to Customize, Unit Setup, and just show you how easy to change it is to change the units back to millimetres there. And so you can see there 500 by 500 by almost a metre. I'm not going to worry too much about the exact measurements, I just want to have a rough idea of the size. And so maybe I thought a simple thing I can show you is maybe a chair. So I'm going to right click, convert to editable poly. So before I've done anything to that box, I've converted it to something else. And you can see then in Properties, or in the Modify tab, I've got the options there, Vertex, Edge, and Polygon. There are two others, Border and Element, but I'm going to be focusing on those three, Vertex, Edge, and Polygon. And you'll see you'll have a similar approach when you use certain tools in Revit as well. So with Vertex, I can select any corner, and we get this gizmo you can use to move things. Edge, of course, I can select any side or any edge, and again, move those. And then, of course, same with Polygon. Select a whole face or whole surface, and again, move that. Right, so I want to project out from this side, and I might also come out from the back. So I'm holding down Control to select multiple faces, and then I'll hold down Control still to select that third one. So I've got three faces selected. And I'm going to use an option in the panel below. You can see there you've got the Extrude tool. I'm going to click onto that. I'm going to click and drag, and you can see it's extruding, but it's extruding in the direction of one of those faces. So I'm going to undo that, and then click on the button next to Extrude to change the settings. And there you can see we can change this option here to by polygon, so instead it'll extrude in the direction of each of those faces. So you can also choose local normal, which can sometimes be useful, but in this case by polygon's the one I want. Oops, sorry. Let's get back to local normal. Sometimes that is useful. Just show you that one. Okay, so local normal, you can see there I can do them connected. But again, by polygon's the one I want. And so there, I've got it selected. You can select while you're doing this. That can make it a bit confusing, but I'll just go and select those again. Okay, so then I can use the arrows here to change the value. If that button's down, you can also click on the face and drag to increase that value. Right, so I'm going to change the display there to wireframe so that you can see I've still got the original box shape there. And if I go back to shaded, I could also go on that menu to edge faces, and that can make it a bit easier when you're working with polygons. So essentially we're just working with surfaces that are actually always flat. You can make them appear curved, and I'll show you how to do that at the end, but for now I'll just keep them as flat, and that's the basis of polygonal modelling, and that's what makes it different to the other ways of modelling that you have things like NURBS and patches and things like that. So again, I can hold down Control to select all those faces on the top, move them down a bit maybe, and then I'm going to just select these faces on the outside and bring them in a little bit. Okay, and so then I want to have a seat set down, and so again I'm going to use Extrude. I can use that to, in this case, sorry, that won't make too much sense actually, I'll do it the other way. So sometimes you can go down, but because I've got that face on the front, I'm going to do it differently. I'm just going to bring those down, and I'll extrude these 3 pieces up. So again, very simple seat, but then I might bring the back pieces out. And I want to have these separate, so if I extrude from the sides there, later when I round these, they should be separate pieces. I'm just going to leave that gap there just so you can see that when it happens. And that's pretty close to the finished form. I might just bring the backs in. There are quicker ways of selecting, you'll see later, but for now that's good enough. Okay, so now I might start rounding, and there are different approaches to rounding. You'll hear a lot of people who do a lot of 3D modelling talk about subdivs, and that's something I'd highly recommend you research if you're interested in 3D modelling. You can do a lot with subdivs to make things look more organic. It's a really useful method to create smoothed corners or rounded corners essentially, and to smooth out geometry. But it's a bit more complicated than the other method I'm going to show you, which is just to manually put in your corners. So just to show you what I mean, I'm going to select these corners, and you'll see now why I wanted to keep those separate. This one here, you can see I've got 2 edges there. So I'm going to use the option there, it's on crossing. So if you remember in AutoCAD and Revit, you've got the option to choose between window and crossing when you go left to right or right to left. But in Max, it's a button. So with Control, I'm going to click and drag over that edge there to make sure I've got both the edges, because there's a small one and a big one. And now, instead of holding down Control, I'm going to hold down Alt. So Control adds, Alt deselects, and I can click on that bit of the edge sticking out, and you can see then why I left that little gap there, just to make this bit easier. So now I'm just going to keep using Control to get all the edges I want rounded. So think about an upholstered chair. This is a pretty typical sort of shape that Mies and lots of other architects would have used. So that one's going to get a bit tricky because that is still joined. I'll have to look at that in a minute. So maybe we'll just check that when it happens, but yeah, just so you can see how it works. There we go. So I've got all the edges on the outside there, except actually these as well. There we go, of that back piece. Okay, so now I can use chamfer. So again, I'm not just going to click on the button, I'm going to click on the settings next to it. And yeah, that's worked well. So then with the radius value there, you can change the chamfer amount. And then with the segments, you change the smoothness. So the segments put in the curve. Oops, just a bit close there. Okay, so you can see there, as I zoom in, the curve becomes a bit clearer because we've got the edges turned on. And that's one of the best things about polygonal modelling. You control the level of detail. So for things that are viewed further away, you don't need as many facets, and they'll still appear curved. But things that you're going to be viewing closer up, you need to put more detail in. And that's important when you're modelling because you don't want too much detail in things that don't need it. Okay, so maybe I can make that a little bit larger, since it is meant to be a cushion. There we go. And then I can continue going back to these other edges. So I'll just click tick to finish that one, and then I can select the edges of the arms. And I know there's going to be a problem, but I wanted to show you how to resolve that too. Okay, so I've got these arms, which at the moment are connected to the base. So I can round them, but if I do, you can see there's a problem at the join there. So cancel out of that. I can just go to Polygon now, select those pieces, so again just using control here, and it's really a lot like modelling when you model by hand. You're just working with flat surfaces, except you can do a lot more detail than you could do with a physical model. So now I'm just going to go to detach down the bottom here. I can make that into a separate piece, so I'll call that arm. So you can always break your models apart. So then I can select, so here, notice I'm in sub-object mode, and that's the last major thing I wanted to show you. So there we've got an editable poly, which has these different elements. When any of those are selected, then it's like you're working in sketch mode in Revit. You can only select the parts within it. You just need to click onto one of those buttons, or choose that option editable poly at the top, and then you can select something else. So there's my separate arm piece, and notice it's missing a face in there. So I can just go to the sub-object option that I want for it, and that'll actually be border, and you'll see there's a special tool there to fill in gaps called cap, so I can just fill that in. And now back to edge, and I can just select all those pieces. There's a really useful option here, loop, and also ring. Ring's done one too many, so I'll just deselect that. You can see there that's just gone around and done a lot of those extra edges for me. And I'll manually select the others. Okay, so I've just selected the outer faces there. And I could have made a box, obviously, but it's easier to line it up by doing it this way. And then using chamfer, again, it's still got the same settings as before, so I can easily just move that in now. Oops. I won't even worry. I've left a few, if you know about modelling, I've left a few vertices unwelded, but that's okay. And so then the cushion, I could do the same thing. Disarm, I can copy across. So there I might decide, well, I don't need those faces anymore, so I can just easily delete those. Not a problem. Holding down control. So there's a lot of flexibility when you're modelling this way. And I do a lot of my concept design this way, because the things I design often I can't model using hand or manual modelling techniques. You just can't get the level of detail that you need. And if you've been wondering how Daniel Lipskind and Zaha Hadid and all those people do their complex geometries, they don't model them by hand, no matter what they say, and no matter what some design people might try to tell you, some older people. You cannot model those things physically using your hands. You might be able to do it using a 3D printer and a laser cutter and some things like that, but you can't do it by hand. So they have 3D people modelling all of the things. They don't use the software themselves, but they do have people who do that. And that's how you get often the detail that you might want if you're doing complex geometries. So, so again, here I've got these pieces. Just want to show you how I can join those now to make a cushion. So I just need the sides in. I don't need to worry about the other parts maybe for this. So I'll just put in some faces. I could use cap, but you can also go and manually create faces. And so why can't I see the option? Here we go, create. And the trick there is just to draw clockwise. So you can easily draw in your own faces. And, I missed one. Let's do that again. So click, 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 click. So notice each time I was clicking on a vertex. And so vertexes are essentially the rig or the frame for your polygons. And so often you'll create the vertexes first if you're manually creating polygons, and then afterwards go in and build the polygons on top of those. And does anyone know the reason that you might need to draw these clockwise instead of anti-clockwise? What are the possibilities if we're just creating an abstract face or plane in a 3D environment? Or maybe have a look at the faces, what's happening with that face on the base as opposed to the one on the top. Notice how they look different? Pretty much, yep. So this one is greyed out, and that's telling us it's back facing. In other words, it's facing away from us. And so faces are sided. And usually the things inside your geometry don't need to have a surface that's facing away from you. So by creating things clockwise, you're telling the program that you want the face to be facing towards you. And there we are, so that's it there. Okay, so then I can weld these, and this is the very last thing I wanted to show you. If I wanted to round these corners off, I might now have some problems. Okay, so I'll just do that and show you what happens. If I go now to use chamfer, well, it's working pretty well actually, but sometimes you will have issues. I'm going to show you one last thing. If I click on a vertex here, let's try that one, move it away. Oh, it's pretty good actually. Yeah, that's all joined. Yeah, what can happen that's for once not misbehaving itself, but often it won't. If you find that you have things that aren't connected, so let's see if I move this one away. No, that's all connected. Anyhow, you'll sometimes find that they need to be welded. So there, let's have a look actually. I've just gone into expert mode. You've got, well, you can see there, one vertex. You might find that there are 3 vertexes there. There could be one for each face. And if that happens, you'll sometimes need to weld them together. But in this case, it's okay. So again, I can just quickly go and chamfer those. You could use chamfer boxes for this, but if you think about the possibilities, you can do a lot more with this than you can with just chamfer boxes. And so there we go, that's close enough. And put those arms, so I can copy the arms on the other side, just holding down Shift, and then clicking and dragging to copy it over the other side. Turn off the edge faces, so I've got some basic cushions there. And so that's creating from a box. The other option is to create from just a profile, so something like a circle. If you wanted to create arms, sorry, the frame for the arms, just very quickly, that can be turned into an editable poly as well. I won't do all of this, but just to give you the basic idea. If I have a circle, and then on the Modify tab, you can use Extrude, just like Revit and AutoCAD. That'll give it a height. And again, right-click, convert to editable poly. And then I can go and continue as polygons by selecting, say, the top surface there and extruding it more. And I can, again, maybe just do something simple like hinge to bring it around. Or, again, have a look at the settings and put in more segments as I do that, and then just continue extruding and using those other tools to build up. So you can model in a fairly free-form way, just using polygons, just thinking about the surfaces that you need to create. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. That's all with the one tool, and so again, like I was saying, it's sometimes hard to know where to start because you do have lots of different ways of beginning things. In primitives, you've got all these different primitives, and then you've got extended primitives, let alone all the other different things. You've got automatic stairs and doors and windows. But often that's not a good place to start. It's better just to start simply with something like a box and then see what you can do with it. And again, that basic approach called polygonal modelling with polygons, is essential in any 3D program. Maya and SketchUp both work in the same way, essentially. And the key to it in Max is knowing that you get to those polygonal modelling tools using an editable poly. Or there is one other option, which if you work through the exercise, you'll see is what they show you there. It's just slightly different. Instead of converting to an editable poly, what you do is you add an edit poly modifier. That way the box still is there underneath, and the edit poly goes on top, and you can make changes in theory with the option to still go back to the box. Right, so go with those steps in the exercises because it'll give you some idea about the possibilities when using that edit poly modifier, but in reality converting to an editable poly is better. And do you understand the difference, what an edit poly modifier is doing as opposed to converting to an editable poly? Essentially, when you convert to an editable poly, you're changing the object into something else. So you're changing the box into a collection of faces, and the box isn't there anymore. You can't go back and change the width and the height and the length of the box anymore. Yeah, if you want to change it, you have to move one of the faces or move one of the edges or something like that. But if you add an edit poly modifier, in theory you can go back and change, say, the height or the width of the box, and have that translate and add the changes that you're making to the other sub-elements later. In theory that works, but in reality it's a bit confusing because what if you do something like an extrusion, bringing this side out, and then make some pretty drastic changes like this, and maybe I'll just do another one just so it's even clearer. Let's do a bevel. Okay, so a bevel's like an extrusion, but then you can make the face get bigger or smaller. So what if you do that, but then go back and change the box? How does it know what the width is going to do, or the height, or the length? Whether it should change just the original faces or change everything. So in reality, there's a lot of potential to use that hierarchical approach, but in reality most people who do polygonal modelling for a living, and there are lots of them, they don't work that way. They'll just convert it to an editable poly and work in it as again polygons, which is a lot like SketchUp, but much more powerful in a program like this. And also Maya actually uses a very similar approach to modelling. So if you're interested in 3D modelling, as opposed to the sorts of modelling you do in Revit, that's a really good place to start, using polygonal modelling, and that's what you're doing in that exercise there, making the tower. The second one is using compound objects, and that's really what we had slotted in to look at today, but I'll come back to that later. So modelling compound forms, that's basically taking one thing from another, so cutting holes out of walls using boxes and other things, which you can do with voids in Revit, things like that. I'll have a look at that later.